You've won the argument in the shower 1,000 times. You found the perfect comeback, the killer fact, the flawless line of reasoning. 10 minutes too late. The actual conversation was a frustrating mess, a head-on collision where you both walked away angrier and more convinced you were right. This video is about how to win the real argument, the one happening live. It requires a complete shift in strategy, moving from brute force to surgical precision. And by the end of this, you'll understand how to control the entire frame of a disagreement using only questions. The person who asks the questions controls the conversation. The person who answers them is on defense. You've been on defense your whole life. We think arguments are battles of facts. You bring your facts, they bring theirs, and whoever has the heavier stack wins. This is the single biggest reason you lose. When you present a contradictory fact, you are attacking someone's belief. That attack triggers a defensive state. Their brain shuts down its logic centers and goes into identity protection mode. They stop listening to understand. They only listen for the flaw in your next sentence. You're fighting against millions of years of evolutionary wiring. It's a fight you will almost always lose. The Socratic method reframes the entire encounter. You are an archaeologist, not a soldier. Their argument is a structure built on a foundation of assumptions. Your job is to hand them a shovel and a flashlight, then ask them to start digging. You never touch the structure yourself. You just ask questions that guide them to the points where the foundation is cracked. Your curiosity becomes your weapon. A genuine patient curiosity is more disarming than any statistic you can throw at them. And it all starts with a simple shift. You stop making statements and you start asking for definitions. The first layer of questioning is the simplest and most overlooked. It's the art of asking for clarification on the words they use every day. People build entire worldviews on abstract concepts like freedom, fairness, success, or justice. They use these words as if they have a single universal meaning. They rarely do. When someone says, "This new policy just isn't fair," your instinct is to argue about the policy. You'll bring up data points, precedents, and expected outcomes. This is a trap. You've accepted their premise that the debate is about the policy. The Socratic approach ignores the policy entirely. It targets the word fair. You ask, "Could you help me understand what fair means to you in this context?" Or, "When you use the word fair, what's the principle you're applying?" Suddenly, the conversation is about their internal dictionary. They are forced to stop attacking your position and start defending their own foundation. This is a huge shift. They might say, "Fair means everyone gets the same outcome." Now you have something solid to work with. You have a principle. It's no longer a vague feeling, it's a rule. And rules can be tested. So you ask, does that principle of fairness as equal outcome apply in all situations? For example, in a 100-meter race, is it only fair if everyone crosses the finish line at the same time? They are now in a bind. If they say yes, their position is absurd. If they say no, they have to admit their definition of fair isn't a universal principle, it's situational. This means they have to explain the conditions under which it applies. They are doing all the work. You haven't stated a single opinion. You've just held up a mirror. This works for almost any abstract noun. We need to focus on growth. What precisely do we mean by growth? Revenue, profit, user base, market share. Each one implies a different strategy. Getting them to define their terms exposes the hidden assumptions they brought to the table. Most of the time, they haven't even defined it for themselves. Your question forces them to build the blueprint for their argument right in front of you. But what happens when their foundation seems solid? When their definitions are consistent? That's when you move to the second layer of attack. Once the terms are defined, you need to test the logic that connects them. You do this by asking questions that trace their reasoning backward. You become a detective, asking, "How did you get here?" The most powerful phrases you can use are, "How did you arrive at that conclusion?" and "What would have to be true for that to be the case?" Let's say a colleague insists, "We have to switch to the new software platform immediately. It's the only way to stay competitive." The confrontational approach would be to list all the reasons the old platform is better or why the new one is flawed. This leads to a stalemate. The Socratic approach is to accept their conclusion for a moment and ask them to show you the path they took to get there. "I hear you. Could you walk me through the steps that led you to believe it's the only way?" The word "only" is a brittle point in their logic. Absolutes are fragile. They now have to reconstruct their argument for you. They might say, well, our main competitor is using it, and their sales are up 10%. You have your next question. Okay, so the underlying assumption is that their sales increase is caused by the new software. What evidence do we have that the software is the primary cause, and not their new marketing campaign or a change in pricing? You are questioning the causal link. You are asking them to prove causation, not just correlation. This is something very few people think about. They see two things happening at once, and their brain draws a line between them. Your job is to ask them to justify the line. You can continue this chain of how and why questions. Why is their strategy the correct one for us to copy? How does this platform solve our 3 biggest client complaints from last quarter? Each question forces them to provide another piece of the logical chain. You are simply asking to see their work. More often than not, you'll find a link is missing. A huge leap of faith is masquerading as a logical step. They made an assumption. Your questions expose that assumption without you ever having to call it one. They expose it to themselves. The moment they can't answer a how or why question, they feel the weakness in their own position. The structure crumbles on its own. But this technique has a vulnerability. A skilled debater can often build a logically consistent, if flawed, argument. That's when the argument moves from the real world into the hypothetical. This is where the real power begins. When an argument is internally consistent, but produces a result you believe is wrong, you need to change the environment. You do this by using hypothetical scenarios to stress test their principle. You take their logic and apply it to a different situation to see if it still holds. This is the intellectual equivalent of taking a car designed for city streets and seeing how it performs in the desert. The core question is, if we apply this principle universally, what are the consequences? Let's go back to the fairness as equal outcome example. Once they've admitted it doesn't apply to a race, you've established the principle is conditional. Now, you introduce a hypothetical closer to the original topic. Imagine the debate is about grading in a classroom. They want a fair system where effort is rewarded more than performance, leading to more equal outcomes. You can create a hypothetical. Let's imagine 2 students. Student A studies for 1 hour and gets a perfect score on the test. Student B studies for 10 hours and fails the test. Based on your principle of fairness, who should get the better grade? This is a nightmare for them. Their principle of fairness directly contradicts the commonly held value of competence. They are forced to choose. If they reward student B, they are advocating for a system that ignores results. If they reward student A, they are abandoning the very principle they were just defending. You have trapped their logic. You did it without ever stating your own opinion on grading. Another powerful form is the reversal hypothetical. You take their exact position and flip the actors. If our competitor, who has our exact market position, were to adopt this strategy, would you advise them that it's a good idea? If they say yes, they look foolish for helping a competitor. If they say no, they have to explain why the same strategy is good for you, but bad for an identical company. The hypocrisy is exposed. The key is that the hypothetical must be logically sound and directly test the principle they've laid out. You aren't introducing new facts, you are using their own logic as the engine of their argument's destruction. But what if the argument isn't based on logic at all? What if it's rooted in pure, unshakable emotion or identity? You will eventually hit a wall of belief. This is the point where logic fails because the person's position is an extension of who they are. To abandon the belief is to abandon a piece of their identity. Arguing against it with facts or hypotheticals is like trying to reason with a hurricane. It's a waste of energy. This is the moment for the most advanced and most dangerous Socratic technique, the consequence question. These questions gently force the person to examine the implications of their own beliefs on their self-concept. You turn the camera around. Instead of looking at the argument, they are forced to look at themselves holding the argument. You might ask, what are the long-term consequences of holding this belief? Or, what does believing this allow you to do? A more direct version is, what kind of person comes to this conclusion? This question is a tactical nuke. It must be handled with extreme care. It forces them to reconcile their argument with their own values. Let's say someone is advocating for a ruthless, cutthroat business tactic. You've tried logic, you've tried hypotheticals. They are unmoved. You can then ask, very calmly, if we adopt this as our official policy, what does that say about us as a company? What does it say about the kind of people we are? The conversation is no longer about profit and loss, it's about identity. Are we the kind of people who do this? The person is now arguing with their own conscience. Another variation is to explore the payoff of the belief. People hold on to irrational beliefs because they get something out of it. It might make them feel safe or morally superior or part of a group. A carefully phrased question can bring this to the surface. What's the emotional payoff for viewing the world this way? Or, how does holding this position serve you? This can feel therapeutic, but it's a surgical strike at the root of their conviction. They have to confront the fact that their logical position might be a shield for an emotional need. Using these questions requires a calm, non-judgmental tone. Any hint of accusation will backfire spectacularly. It must come from a place of genuine inquiry. You are simply asking them to reflect. The internal pressure this creates is immense, far more than any external pressure you could apply. But once you master this, you also need to know how to defend against it. When you recognize someone is using this method on you, the power dynamic can be reversed. The key is to name the game. By showing you understand the process, you break its spell. If someone is trapping you in a chain of why questions, you can pause and say, "That's a series of great questions. It seems like you're trying to help me find a potential flaw in my reasoning. Could you perhaps state your primary concern directly so I can address it?" You've pulled back the curtain. You've shown them that you see the technique. This often forces them to abandon the Socratic frame and present an actual argument of their own. At which point, you can start asking them questions. If they use a hypothetical to trap your logic, you can challenge the hypothetical itself. That's an interesting scenario. For my own clarity, what specific part of my principle are you testing with this example? Again, you're asking them to reveal their strategy. You are meta-analyzing the argument. Another defense is to answer a question with a question. If they ask, "What do you mean by fair?" you can respond with, "That's the central question, isn't it? Before I share my definition, I'd be interested to hear what standard you're using." You've bounced the Socratic ball back into their court. The most powerful defense against the identity-level attack is to agree with it, but reframe it. If they ask, "What kind of person comes to that conclusion?" you can answer honestly. A person who prioritizes results over feelings, or a person who believes that long-term survival sometimes requires difficult short-term choices. I'm comfortable being that person. Are you comfortable with the alternative? You have accepted their framing but turned it into a position of strength. You've owned the identity they were trying to make you feel ashamed of. Understanding these defensive maneuvers is critical. It ensures that this method becomes a tool for clarity, not a weapon of manipulation. It allows you to steer conversations toward truth, even when someone else is trying to steer you into a corner. The true goal of this entire method is clarity. Sometimes, that clarity leads to you winning the argument. More often, it leads to the argument dissolving entirely because the core disagreement was based on a misunderstanding of terms or a flawed assumption. You discover you were both trying to solve different problems. This is the real victory. It's moving beyond the binary of winning and losing into the realm of mutual understanding. The power this gives you is profound. While everyone else is throwing rocks, you are studying blueprints. You see the structure of their thinking, often more clearly than they do. You are operating on a different level of the game. The most uncomfortable truth is that this method will show you the flaws in your own arguments more often than in anyone else's. When you start asking yourself these questions, what do I mean by that word? How did I arrive at this conclusion? What are the consequences of believing this? You begin a process of radical self-reflection. You start demolishing your own poorly built ideas before anyone else gets the chance. That's the ultimate power play. It's the ability to find the truth, even when it means proving yourself wrong. So the next time you feel the heat of a disagreement, resist the urge to make a statement. Take a breath and ask a better question.